I think that's the notion here. Is it's a paradigm shift that is feasible rather than right and wrong answers.
So which story in the book do you think best illustrates sort of the way a good death?
Well, there's a couple things I'll say. Well, let me zero in on the one that there was an excerpt in the New York Times on Sunday. Some of you might have seen. I called it "The Best Possible Day," and it was about my daughter Hunter's piano teacher, who in her she was 62 when I got a call from her husband saying that she was in the hospital. She had a sarcoma, which is a soft tissue cancer, and her particular kind was one that required really aggressive therapy. And so 3 years before that call, she had undergone surgery to remove half of her pelvis, to undergo chemotherapy and radiation, and she'd done remarkably well after a year in hell and returned to teaching. But then she developed a side effect of the treatment, which was a leukemia-like malignancy caused by the chemotherapy. This can be part of the consequence. And so she was on chemotherapy for that. She still kept teaching through it. And then it started to fail, and it turned out her cancer was back, and she was in tremendous pain now from growth in her hip, in her pelvis again, and the pain made it so she couldn't move, and she became incontinent, and she was in a bed at the Mass General Hospital, miserable for 2 weeks, dying. And when I spoke to her, when she called, her husband called saying, what are we going to do? She felt she was days away, that I asked those questions, what were your fears, what are your worries? And her biggest worries were that she'd never leave the hospital, that she would just dwindle away there, be in pain right to the end, and that this thing would take away everything that she cared about. The choices they were trying to think through is, would she try for an experimental therapy, find some place that would give her one? They didn't have chemotherapy that there were no existing options left. Or would she go on hospice, or as she put it, would she give up? And I think in some ways that's how the doctors felt about it, that we didn't have many other options except just be comfortable. Being comfortable isn't enough to live for in some way in the time that you had left, even if it was just going to be a few days. And so when I heard her say what her fears and goals were, I said, well, maybe what we could fight for was just to have a good day. And that's what hospice often does. So she agreed to go on hospice, and and I had to tell my 13-year-old daughter that she wouldn't be having piano lessons anymore, and that Peg was dying. And my daughter wanted to see her, and I said I didn't think that was going to be possible. And then we got this surprising call where Peg called us up and said, if it would be all right, she'd like to teach Hunter again. I couldn't believe it. I mean, neither she nor I thought it was possible that on hospice she would be able to return to teaching. And my daughter ended up getting lessons. What happened was her hospice nurse, a woman named Deborah French, worked with her to identify what would be a good day for her. And first it was just a day without pain. And they got her a hospital bed that was they put it on their first floor so she didn't have to navigate the stairs, which was very painful. They had a bedside commode, and they worked on her pain medications. They increased her morphine doses substantially, and then gave her Ritalin, which combated the stupor that the medication could put you in. And once her pain was under control for a couple days, she lifted her sights, and she said, I have a few things I still want to do. I have some people I want to say goodbye to, and I would like to teach. And so she called up the students who would be willing to do that, and they did. They came. All of them came. And it took a lot of medical expertise, how to make it possible for her to meet her priorities. The doctor and the nurse had to titrate the doses, time it so it would peak at the time when she was about to teach, but not be so high that she'd be groggy and unable to teach. And my daughter got 4 weeks of lessons after that. And then the students played 2 concerts for her. One was a last recital that the students put on, And her former students, who were now adults and performers around the country, came back and played a concert for her. They played, Brahms and Dvorak and Beethoven for her. And then a week later, she fell into delirium, and a few days after that, she died peacefully. At the beginning, we never would have expected any of that. And I chafe a little bit at calling that a good death. The goal is not a good death. The goal, I said at the beginning, is a good life, as good a life as possible all the way to the very end. And that was what they were fighting for and working towards and using medical capability and driving towards. I end that section telling what my favorite moment of all of that was, which was that people want to pass on wisdoms, and they want to make sure they brought some closure to some of the people in their lives. And for each of the students, she took them aside and gave them a personal gift and said a few words to them. And I watched as Hunter went up, and she gave her a book of music that she'd selected for her that she wanted her to learn. And then she put her arm around her, and she just whispered to her, "You're special." And that was what she wanted all of those children to know.